Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heater, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. It should be an interesting conversation for me today because this is a topic I, quite frankly, am really realizing more and more I could be doing so much better at this. So making a conscious effort, but always wanting to learn more. And I'm so passionately eager to learn from the incredible guests on this show today. Let's introduce ourselves. If you don't know me, if you're new to this podcast, welcome. My name is Sarah Heater. I'm the host of Big Brave Business, and I'm also the founder of PodFox Media. We're a podcast production and strategic consultation company.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm Michelle Beauchamp. Sarah, thank you for inviting me today. What I'm focused on is helping people feel as though they belong. That's my mission in life, is helping people feel as though they belong.
Hi, everyone. Sarah, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Lindsay Hyatt, and I'm a copywriter and brand strategist and a mentor for small business owners. So you might see me out there raising hell on social media. That's where I like to do it.
And I'm Allie Cameron. I'm a disability advocate running the Seated Perspectives account on Instagram and now building a business working with other disabled women build their own brands and expertise there too.
Hi, I am Erica Stanley. I am a branding and AI strategist. I have my own digital agency called Mile End Digital and a podcast called the AI Queens podcast, where I teach women entrepreneurs how to use AI in their businesses.
And I am Erin Perkins. I am deafblind myself, and my business is really teaching other small business owners how to build accessibility in their business beyond just their website.
So I keep on saying can of worms. That's so gross. Is there another way to say, like, let's go down this black hole of huge conversation? But anyway, the big question this week is, what does true accessibility in business look like? And what barriers still prevent full inclusion?
I do not think there is anything that is truly inclusive because there is no possible way that you can actually meet every single person that has a disability in the way that they need to. But how to actually do it is to build equity, like build experiences so that they still feel like they're going through the same experience. Like for me, for example, one of the things for me is always important for me to have caption. However, there are other people that find the caption distracting for them. So how do we find that balance? You should always have the person who controls their screen to be able to turn it on and off. So that's like one of the things how I look at how you can build true inclusion is having different ways to access things without making one person feel like they are a burden.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very much about that optionality, right? It's like making sure that, well, not only people have the mechanisms to request whatever needs they might have and to make that not be an onerous or challenging or difficult process in itself, because it can be, and highly stigmatized too, but also then providing the different options that like people can leverage depending on their own specific needs to then equitably be part of the conversation.
I want to agree with both of you, and I have another example of things to look at in terms of accessibility, and that does have to do with inclusion, and it does have to do with belonging, and that is making sure that people have the information that they need in order to be able to do what they want to do. So, for example, if a company says to their employees, tell your friends that we have a job opening, well, most likely their friends might not be very different from them. So the question that I have and the thing that's important to me is that people have access to the opportunities that are available, and not just the people who have affinity with each other, but the market as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yes. So how do we, in the current climate that we're in, she says delicately, how how do we encourage, Michelle, the example you gave is access to job opportunities.
Right.
How do we make sure that we are advocating for putting those job opportunities in places where they have equal access to people, not just through who they know, but the ability for anyone and everyone to see and have access to those opportunities?
See, Erica, I think that's a great question. And a lot of it is going to begin with what is inside of a person. Is the person or the company, is the culture of the company one that they really want to create opportunities for everybody? Or is it one that they just want to follow along so now they don't, quote unquote, have to? If they do want to, then they can expand their resources. They can contact different organizations and associations to help them understand what they're looking for and ask what kind of opportunities can you think of that you can bring? What kind of people do you know of? Who do you know? Who can you think of that's in your organization that could participate in our organization? And I'm talking about new opportunities and promotion opportunities. So, yeah, you bring up a good question. And to me, it's really what's in their heart. What's in their mindset, what's in their heart.
I want to add onto that one of the big things that I have discussed a lot is we can look at recruitment practices and making sure our recruitment process, first of all, like where are we getting applicants? Then what is the actual process of recruitment and hiring and onboarding? And I think that a lot of DEI programs have talked about those things. I'm not trying to say they've done them well in all cases, but they've talked about those things. But one of the biggest obstacles I see that's like a true barrier to prevent inclusion is what happens after someone's hired and onboarded. And I think this is kind of one of the things you were getting at, Michelle, where bringing people of all different life experiences, identities, etc., into a company, and then who's set up for success, who's set
Mhm.
up for belonging, what is the culture like, and how are people building relationships with each other. And if we're not exploring all of those things, we don't have retention and we don't have upward mobility inside of those organizations. And I think that's a barrier.
I just wanted to pop in too and ask or ask the crowd here, with the job market so difficult as it is just in general right now, and the current state of things as they are, delicately, she said. I mean, there's a lot of concerns for people in the job market, period. But then when we're looking at the quality of opportunity here, I mean, it's something I stress about all the time. I'm thinking about even my kids when they grow up, what's going to be there if they need extra access to resources and things. So this is something that's on my mind. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that in the current state of the world.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always think about the concept of disclosure as being like that sort of scary barrier. I mean, I'm visibly disabled, I have my wheelchair, so like it's hard to hide. But I mean, there's a very clear point when I'm in the application process as to when I will disclose and when I won't. And that's only once it becomes like a physical requirement. Like, am I going into an office to have an interview? Then it's like, that's my clear line. But I know for a lot of other people, it's not as like distinctive. And there is a need to sort of perhaps disclose before to request accommodations for even the earlier stages of an application process. And even like, okay, are companies even adapting their application process at the like hit an application, like hit apply moment, which a lot of companies aren't. And the sort of point, there's a stat that sticks in my brain all the time when it comes to sort of DEI and in corporate spaces where like, I think there was a report done where of 90% of companies, of the 90% of companies that did have a DEI program, only 4% have anything to do with like disability.
Mm.
And that's tiny, right? Like that's really, really small. So, yeah, great DEI movements and yes, inclusion and yes, belonging, but of who? Like, who are we still leaving out of that conversation, especially when disability does intersect all those other lived experiences? Why is that sort of lacking?
Yeah, I mean, that I had that experience when I was trying to apply for a job, and one of the questions they would ask is, "Do you have a disability?" And I was always like conflicted on how to answer that because if you look at me, I my disabilities are hidden. You don't see that. So I can usually get away with it. But like if it's a virtual interview, I cannot tell you how many times in the last 2 years I met someone new online, we're having a Zoom meeting, and the first thing I have to do is, all right, we need to turn on caption. I need to help you figure it out. And it takes like a couple minutes. It's not complicated, but it's like it's not I don't understand why Zoom doesn't do have it automatically switched on. Like why are we having to enable that switch? That should be instant like that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was I just saw a commercial, an ad about with people all with different disabilities, a deaf person, a person in a wheelchair, I think a dwarf. I hope that's politically correct. All of them, they all are saying, we want a seat at the table. I want a seat at the table. Like, I've always been taught growing up that I'm less than somebody who's not able, somebody who is able-bodied. And that's like what is very tough because it's like, what are people going to think? And in today's political landscape, it's even scarier. Like, I feel like more and more people are going to start masking their disability even more, which is sad because just people with disabilities are the largest minority.
That is interesting. See, I didn't realize that, Erin, but you're all right. I agree with you. It's going to be very sad. And I'm just really disappointed as it sounds like we all are, right? And that's because we realize that it's important to care about everybody. And it seems like the mentality is just focused on white males who have no disabilities or nothing, just white males, and disqualifying everybody else. And every time I hear them say that we're going to be colorblind or we're going to base it on merit, I don't even think those people understand the importance of everything else that falls under DEI. And so I have a question actually. How do we start to educate them more about that? Because the way I feel right now is they're just focused on color and gender, color and gender for the most part. What do you all think about that?
I mean, for me, it's more and more about increasing representation and taking up space. Like even showing up on this podcast for me is an exercise in that. It's like I don't know. It's so easy, I think, as someone who is disabled to just be like, okay, I'm just going to live where I'm comfortable and like this is where my access needs are met and I don't need to worry about anything else. And I mean, that's a big part of why I shifted to working for myself as well. But yeah, taking up space when we feel comfortable to do so, when we have the energy to do so, because that's another big component, particularly in the chronically ill community. It's building that representation that doesn't exist and continuing to educate where we can.
I think we need more advocates and allies. I know for me specifically, since I started my business, I have always built in accessibility to the websites and the brands that I build, making sure that I'm using alt text, making sure that I'm using visual contrast, captions on videos. But it's not always something I talk about with my clients. I just do it. And I know that if I start speaking up and letting my clients know, hey, this is something that I built in because it's something I believe in. I mean, okay, I only work with people with businesses who share my values. So I don't think that anybody would be like, "Oh, don't build that in." But I don't even think to say, "Hey, this is a thing that means something to me." And so I build it in anyway. And I know that the women that I work with would be appreciative of that and just continuing to vocally say that. And even, I mean, as putting it into my social media, hey, I built this site. And also it's got these features because that's important.
This actually is interesting, Erica, because one of the things that we do in my company, so I work in podcasting, which inherently is inaccessible in a lot of ways. And there's been a lot of, in the time that I've been doing this, movement, lawsuits, etc., that have now forced like the big streaming services like Apple and Spotify to provide transcripts natively in the app. But before that, there was a big movement among podcasters who care about stuff to provide transcripts for their episodes. So that's something that we've always provided client, and I don't I guess I shouldn't say always, but from very early on, we provided clients with providing transcripts. Erin popped in the chat. Transcripts in the app are not that great. It's true, and that's true for the ones that we provide too, because they're AI generated. So they're missing a lot
Right.
of
If sorry, I don't want to interrupt. The reason why I said they are not accessible is because I challenge all of you to actually just read the transcript with no audio. You're not, if there's more than one person speaking, there's no way you know who's speaking throughout that. So I feel like there's definitely like
yeah.
a challenge in that aspect.
And there's mistakes for sure as well, that and misspellings too, which is also just disrespectful, especially when you are looking at having diverse speakers from all different cultures all around the world who have all kinds of names, that then the AI is very biased. So misspelled names is also like a really big problem in those transcripts. So the auto transcripts are not like a great solution. It is a step forward, but it is interesting that caring about this, it is something that's been interesting to me all along the journey of like working in podcasting. I talk about, even in my own podcast, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is one of the like pillars of content that I want to talk about and dig into. And it's like, but we're having this conversation on a podcast. And I'm very aware of that, right? And I think that's been an interesting thing for me in my business, is that the more people that I talk to and the more people I learn from, there are a lot of things I've had to rethink, from my sales calls, my website, like you mentioned, Erica, like the content I put on social media, realizing all of the things that I have to rethink to make them more accessible, just because based on my own lived experience, I only know what I know, right? So I'm curious, what are some things that have come up for you all in your lines of work that you've had to rethink to make more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, for me, even it was quite a simple one, but just like I've launched a coaching program. I'm working primarily with disabled women. So I don't have a limit on when they can book their calls by, because like there's so many dynamic things that can happen with disability. And some people, like, I'm done within the 3 weeks and it's like one and done. But another one, like I've been working with for 4 months probably, and we still haven't had like our second or third call, because like that's just a reality of what it means to live with a disability. And I'd much rather like they take their time and do things at a pace that makes sense to them, versus sort of rushing them and it not being a fruitful experience for them.
Ali, you bring up a really interesting point to me, so I don't have anything else to add, but what you just said makes me realize the importance of being patient and having flexibility. So, so many times we are all just like, we have to get this done in this amount of time and hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And what you just said was different people go at different paces based on their abilities. And so being flexible and being patient, it's always something that I need to do, is be more patient. And so that's a good reminder for me. So thank you.
I'm curious. I think when we want to be allies and inclusive in, especially like in the online space, we're thinking about the content we're putting out, or if we're doing a podcast, captions is like the obvious answer to that. But I wonder, going beyond that, thinking about how can I support any type of reader or any type of viewer who's watching this content or maybe interested in it besides captions, what can people do to be an ally?
There's so much that you can do, and it's literally what I teach, because a lot of times, and I was just mansplain this yesterday, that, oh, I don't have anybody that is disabled that access my website. And I was just like, can I punch you? I really wanted to punch him. It was a white male too. And I'm like, he's like, I'm focused on scaling my business. And I'm like, okay, obviously. And then I look at his LinkedIn profile. He's been doing it for 8 years. Like, when is it enough? But the one thing I always want to encourage other businesses, especially if you are not disabled yourself, is that help speak up for us. Because sometimes I feel like our voices are not loud enough. I always just kind of like took things and I always had access handed to me throughout middle school, high school, college. But then when I got into the corporate, I felt like I had to mask my disability. Everyone knew I was deaf, but I needed to make it as simple as possible. Like I would not request an interpreter because I could still hear. But the reality is I still miss like 60% of the conversation. So for me, when I ask for people to support me, it is basically speaking up if something is not done right, and then telling them, hey, have you thought about it this way? It's just like really speaking up on it.
Yeah, I mean, social media, another one that's easy is just image descriptions. Obviously, alt text, Instagram will generate on its own, but that doesn't always cover things. So just giving that optionality again of some people who prefer alt text to image descriptions or vice versa, just making sure you have as much context for people as there as possible. And then, yeah, another one sometimes is just tonal cues as well. If you're writing something and there is a joke or a sarcastic comment in there, just bracketing it as such so that people know that who don't necessarily process things, jokes in the same way.
It, it's an interesting, that's an interesting point that you bring up. And I think it's not just for hearing and vision, but also people with different learning disabilities. So I have a colleague who has been dyslexic her entire life, and she is using ChatGPT and Claude to help her. It has helped her feel so much more confident with her daily communications because she's got this aid now that helps her write emails, put together client proposals, and she's not just like second guessing every single thing she puts out. My sister, when I was growing up, she had a, oh gosh, I wish I could remember what they're called. It's not, is it an IEP? She had special allowances. She could not take multiple choice tests. Just something in her brain. She was not able to, and teachers had to make accommodations for that. And how cool is it that we live in a time where a teacher can take a piece of curriculum or a test, put it into AI, and say, hey, this student does not work well with multiple choice tests. They are going to need long form questions. Can you convert it to this? Or this student needs fill in the blanks. This is the way that they learn. Those are just a couple of examples that come to mind, but those teeny little accommodations, I think, are going to be those little strides, those little steps forward are going to be so much easier with AI and for us to do on a micro individual level.
It's funny that you use that specific example, Erica, because I always struggled with multiple choice tests from the standpoint of I overthink, which is not a disability, but it did make me struggle with multiple choice tests because I always felt like if I could write an explanation as to why I chose that answer, then I could, and true or false is even worse. Like I can talk any statement
Yes.
into being like, here's the reason it's false. But I think that in particular, using that as an example also matters because I'm thinking about what you said, Erin, of feeling like the accessibility stopped after education because things like IEPs, maybe while we have a Department of Ed, maybe
Right.
account for accessibility in education. But once you're out of that, like when we start online businesses or we're running online businesses, are we considering how those same needs in the classroom are now showing up for our ideal customers as adults? And lead magnets are such a common lead magnet is a multiple choice quiz. And it's funny in particular that we're talking about this as an example because I just built one and I built it as a custom bot in ChatGPT, but I set it up so that there are multiple choice. You have to choose one of the choices in order for the quiz to work. However, if none of the choices feel right, you can just spill your guts and chat will figure out which one is the best based on what you said and check with you to see if that's okay based on their reasoning.
I did the same thing because I can't ever choose and I need to justify my choice. Like, oh, I'm mostly A, but a little bit of C on some
Yes.
days.
That's funny. I have another thought too, because when we ask what can, so for example, our listeners, what can people do? We can ask people how we can help. I mean, So for those who are listening and for ourselves, if we sense that, or if we sense two things, if we sense that somebody needs some extra help, then we say, how can I help you? Right? How hard is that to say that? And then maybe they're not showing that they need help, but they really do because they don't want to be judged. So I think as a practice, if we can get into the habit of saying, how can I help you achieve what you're trying to do? Won't that be better? I just had this thought as I was thinking about this, and
And then actually do it. I
yeah,
think that's also really
yeah,
important because asking the
yeah,
question is a big deal. But
right.
actually following through is what builds trust. Because I think when you
Absolutely.
ask the question, get a response of how you could help somebody, and then you don't do it, or you make an excuse as to why that's not possible, or you do part of it, but not all of it. I think that's a huge barrier to accessibility. And I think that that's also really frustrating.
I feel like Allie could probably relate to me. Say we want to go to a concert. The process of me getting a ticket to the concert is not that straightforward. I usually always go to the frequently asked questions to see if they mention anything about accessibility. And then I have to figure out who the hell do I call in order to be able to get tickets that with accessible seats because I need an interpreter. I can never participate in those early bird sales because I have to go through this whole process in order for me to have a close to similar experience as a hearing person. And so I know, so that's one of the things I always try to tell people to add something in the frequently asked question about accessibility, because that is almost always the first place I go. And then the other thing is, if you haven't already, make sure your caption on Zoom is enabled.
Yeah, I think like you bring up such an important point, Erin, of like the what I call the administrative burden of disability. Like it's such a heavy load. Like, I mean, you said going to a concert, going to a restaurant too. Like for me, as someone who's physically disabled, I have to Google, call ahead, like something to to question if like or to ask the question if their space is accessible and what does accessible actually mean, because like Google might say it's accessible but then the bathroom's downstairs or like whatever, like it's just it's only part of or only part of the space is accessible. So it's just like it's the same at work. It's like there is a lot of administrative burden in terms of figuring out if a job will even be accessible. Like I could apply for something and then find out that a space is like not actually accessible, and then it comes down to me deciding on like what I'm willing to compromise on in order to work in that space. Like I, for a year and a half, worked at a company that had 2 floors, one of which was not accessible to me. So I compromised on that. I was like, okay, well, if you feel like we can make it work, then I'll only work in this half of the office. But it's just like now I like years later, I look back on that. I'm like, how the hell was I okay with that? But like also I was a disabled person in the search of work and I wanted to work at a place that like fueled my career progression. So like you have to make compromises in order to follow that journey.
That is a wild story. And I am sorry that there was even an office that wasn't accessible to you. That is like, that's the kind of thing that to a person who does not have a disability feels like, shouldn't that be illegal? Like, why is that even a thing? But it's interesting because I think that knowing people, even if you just feel like people, like you follow people on social media who use their online platform to like educate or to share their experiences or whatever, but also just being in community and knowing more people outside of the people you have affinity with, to what Michelle led, like one of the first things she said in this conversation about, because in college I was in a sorority with a sorority sister who used a wheelchair, and it changed the way we did everything. Like it made us all so aware of how many things there were, traditions that of like, we always go to this restaurant after this particular event, this is what this chapter has done for a decade plus, blah blah. And then come to realize like there were literally zero tables that you could get to with mobility. Like, I mean, that is ridiculous. So, and then it made me start realizing it in different places. The apartment that I lived in at that time in college, there were 0 apartments that were accessible without taking stairs. Literally 0. Like, not only could you not live in that apartment complex, you can't go visit a friend at someone in that, or a family member in that apartment complex. Again, that feels like it should be illegal. Now, of course, this was also several years ago, but especially in 2025, like, what? Why is this still a thing? And I live in Arizona, so it's not like it's old construction and like now standards are different. No, we don't have old construction. Like, it's all new. So what the heck? Anyways, I think sometimes just knowing people or listening to people share their experiences is enough to make you see the world differently. And so the more people we know who have different experiences than we do, the more aware we are of the things we didn't know before.
Yeah, I will just sort of follow up briefly to say that even though obviously I had my circle of friends, most of my friends and colleagues were non-disabled, but it wasn't until I said something that they fully got it. So I shared, like, this is what started my journey with seated perspectives, but I like had another bad experience at an office where they really weren't they really weren't getting it in terms of accessibility. And I was like, nah, fuck this, I'm done. And so I was only there for 4 months. But I sort of got to the end of it. I was like, what? Why do I keep compromising on these things? And I actually sort of wrote a whole list of things that I had compromised on, like this office that I just talked about, other experiences where the accessible bathroom was on a different floor that I worked on, like a whole bunch of different things. And the response I got from people who had been there and seen me do this all, which I did as a good little worker without complaining, was wild. And I was like, oh, okay, people need to know more about this because I was so comfortable, just like comfortable, because I felt like I need to compromise and didn't feel like I could complain about it. No one knew. No one knew how bad and awful it actually was. So talking about that's why it's so important to keep talking about it.
And I just want to add too, that's why it's so important to have diversity. So, Sarah, when you gave your example about your sorority, you know what? Thank goodness that you had that experience because it, like you said, you became aware of it. And so, Ali, your experience, I mean, you woke up, you decided, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore. And so people had to become sensitive to the diversity, the importance of being diverse. That is what is driving me really wild about this current, what are we saying, current climate, is that there is so much beauty in diversity. And if we don't have it, we won't grow. We miss people will miss out on opportunities. We'll miss out on the opportunity for be able to connect with so many people. There's just a lot of advantages of diversity, and you are just explaining them. And to your point, Ali, I hope that people choose to not be quiet and just sit on the sidelines anymore. I hope that people are willing to use their voice, even if they get repercussions. The end result will be, I think, beneficial. So.
I would say the pandemic was one of the places that I truly struggled because we all my friends, we're all deaf. We understand where I'm at, but we didn't realize how much we actually relied on like watching someone's mouth move when we're signing to each other. Like that was like a huge thing. For clear math were okay, but they weren't that great. I'm glad they did it though, but like it got to the point where I'm like, I am tired. I'm tired of always having to be like, let me ask for help. So from this point on, like if I go out to any store and I need to talk to someone, I just type on my phone and give it to them because they always, the minute I start talking, they assume I understand them. And I'm like, no, I'm deaf. But it's like that connection doesn't click for them. I would say in Europe, it's a lot better because they just like take things in stride and they're like, oh, this is good. But in the US, it's like the minute I say I'm deaf, people become dumbfounded. They're just like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, literally, just type on your phone so we can communicate. Because I'm not going to speak. Even though I have the ability to speak, you're going to take advantage of that and speak back to me, which means I have to work 10 times as hard to understand you. So we're not going to go there. So I stopped doing that. I had one more other thing I wanted to say, but I forget.
Does anyone know of any kind of, I hate to like take everything back to AI. This is like mine and Erica's thing. We're always like, how can AI solve this? I saw a TikTok, thank you, social media, for opening my eyes to things that I didn't think about, talking about how captions help, but they really aren't enough for, especially for kids. So, for instead of just doing subtitles or captions, also having, I think there's a couple of things on Disney Plus that have a sign language interpreter actually signing in the corner of the episodes or movies or whatever. And what a big deal that made for a lot of people that they could have, especially their kids, watch without having to read. And so I'm curious, like, does anyone know of an AI tool or an accessible tool that would provide sign language captions?
No, but I do know several companies that are working towards that. So I remember what I was going to say. Every time I meet somebody online, especially in the business world, I start pointing out things to them that are not accessible. Then they start observing the real world and they'll be like, what the hell? And I'm like, yeah, that's like what we've had to live with. So that is interesting. But the thing is for me in using AI to translate sign language, it's not going to be that easy because when you sign in ASL or any other language, there's a lot of expression on our face that add to the context of what we're saying. So that's why it's very tricky that to say, why can't we have AI use that? But there is an AI chat that AI GPT that can help you write alt text, and it's actually very good and amazing. Like I love it. But yeah, it's one of those things that
What off the top of your head?
I will look for it when I stop talking.
Yeah,
So
send it to me and we'll put it in the show notes for sure because I think anybody listening to this is now going to be like, this is important.
I think just you can take a screenshot of a website and use chat and pop that into chat GPT and ask it to give you alt text for those images. There's the human element, of course, you have to double check it, but making sure that, so from an SEO perspective, a lot of web developers will put in alt text that is optimized for SEO, not for the purpose that alt text is meant to exist for. And so that is that is a battle that we've got to continue to fight against and speak up for, that alt text is there for a specific purpose, and that purpose is not SEO.
Yeah, Ali put this in the chat, but I'm going to say it anyways out loud, which is keyword stuffing in alt text is wild. And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's I'm going to say most people who are doing that don't understand that's not the point. And I think that that's frustrating, but I also think people do the best they can with the information they have. And a lot of us just don't know. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, I was gonna vouch for that because I work with a lot of designers and coders and people that eat, breathe, and sleep SEO, and I don't think they know that that's the point of having alt text because it's another opportunity for them to bring somebody to their website. They're not thinking first about, is this accessible to everyone? I can definitely confirm that.
And they would probably do differently if they knew differently.
I think I'd like to think most people would. And I think there really just is a lack of education talking about in the marketing world, even, which is what I'm familiar with. There really needs to be more awareness on these things. But I think that some of it is really good intention people who just don't know better and they don't have these experiences with friends or family or acquaintances in their life to make them think twice like, oh wait, I didn't think about how this would be an extra 3 steps for somebody who needs the extra time or support on this.
yeah, I have a background as a graphic designer. That's where I went to college. They did not teach anything about accessibility back 20 some years ago. I don't think they teach it now. And a lot of people that I know that have become designers and stuff, they're self-trained. And I even admit, my first brand, the colors were not accessible at all. It looked fine to me, but if a colorblind person were to see it, they would have never been able to understand it. That's why I always try to teach people in business is progress, not perfection. Like, show that you are making that effort to be better about providing accessibility. Don't just phone it in or anything.
I will say that the tools that I have been using for years, over the last 2 years, 5 years, a lot of them have started to add those things in. So the tools that I use to create color palettes, they've got an accessibility contrast checker. They've got color blindness and the different types of color blindness. They've got those checkers built in. So you you have to kind of know what you're looking for, but I think we are progress over perfection. The the tools are getting better. Adobe now has this built in as well to their design tools. And people are becoming more aware, and people, once they know, would want to do better.
I think that a big reason why we've seen progress with those tools is because decades of DEI efforts have actually led to some things being institutionalized. And I think we do see that we have made some progress in those ways. And it's just a shame to like stall that progress. And I want to just piggyback off of the other aspect of like progress over perfection too, and say that it's okay in your branding to let people know that. And I think personally, I think that's a way to build trust with people. You don't have to be great at it. You have to be great at saying, I don't know what I don't know, but I want to learn. And I care about working with you in a way that's productive and welcoming and inclusive for both of us. So if even just putting, I'm like thinking about, I was already thinking about from what you all shared, my FAQs page that I've been working on for my website redesign. I've painstakingly write an FAQs page, especially as not a copywriter, by the way. I know I've got a copywriter on here, but is not for the faint of heart. FAQs are the worst. So, anyways, I've spent like weeks on this FAQ copy and it makes me want to rip my hair out. And now I'm just realizing like I want to put definitely accessibility information on there. And what I was already thinking, and I feel so like extra eager about this now, is I want to put on there, hey, I'm working on this. If you have feedback, I genuinely care to learn. So please tell us what we could be doing to serve you better if there's something we're not already accounting for here. Like, I want to know. I genuinely want to know. Lindsay, what were you going to add?
I was actually just going to comment on what Erica said, thinking about some of the platforms and the tools that now have these things built in. From a messaging perspective, just thinking about, I want those brands, the big brands that are having, including these things, to let people know that that exists, because hearing about it, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I had no idea. And some of the platforms, these things are already there to use. And essentially how easy it can be to incorporate these things when they're there. So I think from a messaging standpoint, also the bigger brands have to do a better job with expressing that.
Yeah, to your point, Lindsay, like there's such a massive, I, there's a stat on this as well, but like however much spending power that the disability community has, like it's 16% of the world population, 25% of the US population that's disabled. And they have spending power. So like it's actually a really smart business strategy to like admit or like share that you're doing things to make things, your product, more accessible to people, or that you're making changes to really cater to people who are disabled. Like that is actually going to improve, like build trust with a core demographic. So yeah, it's strange that they're not being more vocal about that.
Go ahead, Erin.
It's weird in the sense like people are like, oh, I don't know better. I didn't know. I'm like, that's okay. Like now let's work towards that. But I will say when I started my business, now I was kind of like figuring out that a lot of small businesses did not know about accessibility. And I also didn't have that understanding of accessibility in a way of how I could advocate for myself. And then when I went to like start studying, learning to get certified, I was like, first of all, this stuff is not easy to understand. Like they make it so heavy in terminology that I'm like, no, no, no. We need to break this down even further. Teach them like they're 5 years old, and that will be okay. And that's like my biggest way of teaching is like, I'm not trying to force businesses to completely dismantle what they built over the years. My job is to show them where the gaps are and how they can build it in. And I think that's why a lot of people are still scared to work with me because I think they're gonna feel like I'm gonna just tear everything apart and be like, let's rebuild it. Like, no, no, no. I respect your process, but let's look at it from an accessibility standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I can speak to my own experience and say a couple of years ago, I made a friend through a networking group and she offered audits of your website using a screen reader. And I was like, oh man, I really want to do this, but I also know I am like, I'm throwing out this entire website anyway. So it feels like it would be like a waste of time and effort. But I also had so much fear that came up. Like, oh my God, everything on my website, it's going to be a terrible result. If I let her, who I've now made friends with, and I've said I care about this, if I let her do this audit, it's going to like expose that actually I'm terrible at accessibility. And so I think there is a lot of fear there. And I think that's really important to just say, like, first of all, this is big, brave business. We can do brave things. And second of all, the brave thing is actually, if you know where you are could be better, what if you just like made progress toward being better? You don't have to be perfect. You could just make progress toward being better. So let this be encouragement to everybody here and everybody listening that you can just take a step. Hopefully, you got some ideas from this conversation, but you can take a step to being better. And if we just keep taking that small progress forward, that bite sized progress forward of getting progressively better, then that's like world changing work. So that's amazing. I could keep having this conversation with y'all for like hours, but we nobody's going to listen to an hours long conversation. So what we know is that this conversation doesn't end here. There's so much more that still needs to be discussed on this podcast, off of this podcast. I hope that this encourages you listening to continue this conversation with the people in your life and in your circles, and you may be surprised what you learn about what other people's accessibility needs and desires are in your own affinity groups, right? So having that conversation more and more beyond this podcast and episode, and then of course we're going to continue to have these conversations on the podcast as well. Thank you so much to everybody who's here. If you want to connect with anybody, which of course you do from this episode, their information is all going to be in the description or the show notes of the episode, as well as their links. But I like to end every single Big Brave Business episode with the same question, which is, and it could be work related, but it doesn't have to be, what is something that's making you happy right now? Who wants to go first? Who's happy?
I'll go. I'm happy. You know what's making me happy right now, Sarah, that you know this about me, is that we are moving to another country. So I am getting ready to learn a lot. We're moving to Spain next month. And so I'm happy about that. There's been a lot of mixed emotions, and one of them is happy. And I'm also happy that you invited me to be on this particular discussion because I'm happy that I learned more things. And the older I get, the more I can still learn. So thank you.
I'm finding more and more that the antidote to everything is community. And so, like, delving into the disability community has been a wonderful balm for my soul. And I think also now I've spent a lot of my entrepreneurial journey so far on my own. So, reaching out to other women entrepreneurs has been like a really beautiful act and a gift to myself. So, yeah, really happy that I'm choosing community more and more.
On the heels of what you're saying about community, I just got back from Alt Summit, which is a conference full of creative female entrepreneurs. And it was a balm for my soul. It was the group that I did not know I needed. And it felt so amazing to be surrounded by all of these creative, badass women who were all just there in support of each other. And there was zero spirit of competition, even though there are so many of us that do similar things. And it just like it flies in the face of everything you're told as a girl growing up that women are fighting and competitive. And nope, it is not, and it doesn't have to be. And this was, I can't imagine not going back every year forever and ever. It was so good.
I love that. I love hearing about that because I think a lot of times we get stuck in kind of our own little brains and like our own little bubbles, especially online, especially as solopreneurs, where we're like, oh, it's going to be scary, or oh, like, I don't know if I'll click. But like hearing, it's a great reminder when you're actually in a group like this or in person that you're like, it's actually really magical to be with people. So I want to say thanks to Sarah for having me on. This makes me happy here, this group. And I'm from up Western New York, so I am just thrilled to see the sun. That's what's making me happy now, springtime.
What makes me happy right now is when I have conversations like these. It shows me that people are listening and are genuinely interested in learning more of how to do better. And because it can be so easy for me to be down and hard on myself, because I feel like with the dismantling of DEI and all of that, they're basically saying I'm not worth it. I'm not important. And all of us as women as well, we are all a DEI, part of the DEI. So finding community like this is really important because it allows you to be exactly who you want to be without hiding who you are from everybody else. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks so many of you for saying that this conversation was part of what's making you happy. That's really meaningful. And I mean, it's definitely true for me too. And I've said this before as my what's making me happy. And I don't want to say it every single week because that, I mean, then what's the point? But truly, this new format is making me so happy. Like I already had really come to feel very proud of the big brave conversations we were having in season 2 one-on-one. I think that there were some really incredible meaningful episodes, and really big brave conversations, and I started to feel like I got really really good at that format toward the end of season 2, just in time for me to decide to switch everything up. And I think that's part of working in podcasting too, is like being brave to try new things and to see what is effective and what is a new fun challenge, and then being able to talk about my experiences. And I just think it makes me feel such a sense of community, and like I'm surrounding myself with these relationships with people like you all who are genuinely the people that I want to be listening to and learning from and connecting with, especially in times like these, in a climate such as this one. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I know these conversations can be tough. It's a lot. It's being vulnerable. It's being big enough and brave enough to say the hard thing, and also to acknowledge, especially in a group scenario, when someone else says something that creates a feeling, an emotional reaction. So like, thank you for being here and meeting me in this space today and meeting each other with the bravery that you have. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you. So thank you. And to you listening, thank you for hanging in there and being brave with us. We'd of course love to connect with you and hear what this brought up for you. What are some of the things that you were inspired to take action to do? What are some other ways that we didn't even address barriers to accessibility and what true inclusion looks like in business? Like, please go ahead and reach out to us and let us know. And so our links to connect with us are all going to be in the description. So thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you'll all be back, and to you listening, see you next week.